We're getting live. We're going live a minute or two early so that people have a chance to join. What does it say about you? 6:58? Yeah. Oh,
People were the Shilpi conference this year.
Oh no, we're live. We'll talk later. Good evening, Kayla Gittel. Okay, our crowd is on Zoom and on Facebook and on YouTube. Beautiful to see everyone. Okay, we are on all our platforms, I believe, and it is Parshas Toldos, the sixth portion in the book of Genesis. And let me tell you what page we're going to start on today. Why don't we start on page 149, and we're going to use this chumash. Oh, let me let some more people in. So we're in the portion of where this is the Torah portion in which Isaac and Rebekah, Yitzchak and Rivka give birth to their twin sons, Jacob and Esau, Yaakov and Esau. But in the process, we go back a little bit in history and time, and we discuss our patriarch Abraham. And tonight's conversation is going to take us into a discussion about the difference between knowing God and believing in God. Some people think that those two terms are interchangeable, but they aren't really. We assume people believe God, they know God, you believe in God, but in Judaism, those are two very different things. How it's connected to Abraham, we're going to see in a moment. How it's connected to our Torah portion, we're going to get to. But it's a very, very important piece of information, food for thought, so that we better understand where we stand in our relationship with God. So before I even read from the verses, I want to quote from the Talmud. The Talmud says in the tractates, let me just pull up the page so you know. So it's in the tractate of Brachot, in the first tractate of the Talmud, page 63a, quote in Aramaic, Ganva, if you speak Aramaic, you'll know exactly what I'm saying. Ganva apum machtarta rachmona kari. A thief, before they break into a home, they call out to God, they ask God to give them a blessing for success. Now, what does that mean? What is the Talmud trying to tell us? Well, the Talmud is obviously telling us that you could be a thief, you could break into someone's home at night, and at the same time, recognize that there's a God and pray to him. How does that make you feel? How would you like to know that the person outside your home breaking in is a big believer in God, and yet they're about to break into your home and take something that doesn't belong to them from you? And so with that note, with that Talmudic statement in mind, I want to read the verse on page 149. And we're going to read 3 or 4 verses, and then we're going to get into the discussion. There was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that existed in the days of Abraham. Isaac went to King Abimelech of the Philistines in Gerar. Where were they? They were in Gaza. So the Philistines were living in the area that today we know as Gaza. The king was Abimelech. Gerar, and the Gerar River was right actually by the border where all those villages, Be'eri and Nir Oz, where all those villages were ransacked and brutalized and murdered. So in that area, there was a king, a Philistine king, and Isaac went to Abimelech to deal with the famine, right? When there's famine, people start to talk to each other. God appeared to him and said, God appeared to Isaac and said, do not go down to Egypt, inhabit the land which I will tell you about. Settle in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you, for I will give all these lands to you and your descendants, and I will uphold the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. So he tells him, you're going to go to the Philistines. That's okay. That's in Israel. Do not go from there, from Gaza, straight to Egypt. Why? Because that's outside of Israel. Don't go to Egypt. Your father Abraham went to Egypt. You are a Oyla Tmima. You are a wholesome Jew. By the way, Isaac never left the land of Israel his entire life. He lived 180 years, and he never left the Holy Land. Unlike Jacob and unlike Abraham, Isaac never left. I will multiply your descendants like the stars of the heaven, and I will give your descendants all these lands. All the nations of the earth will give blessings to each other by comparing themselves to your descendants. Look, just for a moment, before we go any further, just think of that itself. All the nations of the world, of the earth, will give blessings to each other by comparing themselves to your descendants. Look how much time the world spends talking about the Jews. Right? Before people became slightly or mostly insane, Italians wanted to hang out with the Jews. Blacks wanted to hang out with the Jews. Irish wanted to hang out with the Jews. Why do you think they wanted to hang out with the Jews? Because they wanted their children to grow up like that, with the morality, with the ethics, with the Shabbos, with the holidays, with the family experience. There was an envy. The envy of the world was the Jew. And God is telling Isaac, don't leave this land. I'll give you all the blessings right here, so much so that the world will, when they bless their children, it'll all be in comparison to the Jewish people. And then he says, all this is because Abraham listened to my voice when I tested him. So he humbles Isaac over here and says, Bubala, I love you, my dear Isaac. You're a great guy. You're one of the patriarchs of the Jewish people. But just for the record, I'm giving you all these blessings. Ekev asher shama Avram bekoili. Your father, Abraham, listened to my voice. And then he says, and he guarded my secondary prohibitions that protect a person from transgressing biblical prohibitions, my rational commandments, my super rational commandments, and my instructions. In other words, Abraham followed my path, and therefore his descendants are blessed. It's a very, very strong statement, obviously. And there's a very interesting statement in the Talmud, in the tractate Nedarim, page 32a, that says as follows. What was so unique about Abraham that because of him, his descendants merited so many blessings? The Talmud in Nedarim says like this: Ben Gimel Shanim Hikir Avram es Boire. Abraham was 3 years old when he recognized that there's a creator in this world. 3 years old. He had an epiphany that there's a God, there's a creator. How do we know the number 3? So the tractate in the Talmud says that the way we know that it was 3 is from this verse in our Torah portion that we just read. It says, Ekev asher shama Avram bekoili, that it's because of Abraham listening to my voice. And the word Ekev in Hebrew, ayin is 70, kuf is 100, and beis is 2. So Ekev is 172. How many years did Abraham follow and hearken my voice? 172. But Abraham lived 175 years. So it was 3 years when he finally recognized, he was 3 years old, he recognized there's a God, there's a creator. And so for 172 years, he followed and hearkened to my voice. And for those 172 years, he merited that his descendants would be blessed in this incredible way. Fascinating. It's a beautiful statement in the Talmud that out of his 175 years, 172 were godly years. If you ever met a 3-year-old, it's a pretty impressive statement. Because if you ever meet a 3-year-old to recognize God, you ever see 3-year-olds what they're capable of? But Abraham was 3 years old and he recognized God. Here's where it becomes very interesting. The Rambam, Maimonides, the codifier of Jewish law, in his laws of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry, says that Abraham was 40 years old when he discovered God. So Abraham wasn't 3. Rambam says he was 40. Now it's based on other Talmudic or Midrashic statements. 40 means that a much bigger chunk of his 175 years, right? 135, right? What's 175? So 135. Yeah, 135 of his years. 135 of his years he served God, but for 40 he didn't. So Rambam Maimonides says that Abraham was out to lunch for 40 years, and it was only when he was 40 that he found God. The Raibud, who's a commentary on the Rambam and one that often argues with the Rambam, says, and I quote, "You just said in the Rambam, you included in your codification of Jewish law that Abraham only found God and recognized God when he turned 40. Says the Ravid, Yesh Agada ben Shalish Shanim. He says there's a Talmudic statement that says he was 3. What do you mean he was 40? How do you ignore the measures that said he was 3? Shenemar Ekev Hashashama Avram Bekoyle Minyan Akiv, which is exactly what we just quoted from the Tractate of Nedarim, that because of the word Ekev Hashashama, that because Abraham heard God, listened to God's voice, the word Ekev is 172, and the Ravid basically quotes from our Torah portion to question the Rambam statement that Abraham was 40. So the question really becomes, is this really an argument, or are they just talking about two different things? Very often, we get excited in yeshiva, you get excited because there's an argument in the Rambam and the Ravid and the Kesef Mishnah and the Maggid Mishnah, and boy, oh boy, it gets heated up. And that's okay. Sometimes it is an argument. But the Rebbe, in one of his incredible talks, it's printed in his edited volumes of talks, volume 20, and a little bit more also in volume 34, he says it's not really a dispute about facts. It's a dispute about understanding what took place at those particular stages in Abraham's life. When dealing with a relationship with God, there's 2 avenues to that. There's simplistic faith, or as American secularism would label it, blind faith. And then there's intellectual comprehension of God's existence. There's faith of God, or faith in God, and knowledge of God, knowing God. And each one has something to offer to the human being in their relationship with God that the other does not offer. So basically, you need both. And by the way, if you look biblically at the verses, right, you have verses like, V'yadaita hayoyim v'ashivaisa, we say it in Aleinu, V'yadaita hayoyim, you will know today, v'ashivaisa lovecha, you'll take it to your heart. V'yadaita hayoyim, you will know it today. Knowledge of God. And then you have verses that say, Atareis ladas ki Hashem Elokim, everybody knows, it's known to all that God is the God, right? That sort of it's implanted in you. You have this obligation to believe in God and obligation to know God, and they mean 2 separate things. And we need both, which is why we have an obligation for both. And the Rambam and the Ravid and the way they discuss Abraham from our Torah portion about whether he was 3 years old or 40 years old are really championing one of those perspectives. Let's talk about knowledge in God. So When you comprehend God because you spent the time intellectually delving in either to the incredible natural science or nature or medicine, and it's blowing your mind away that God created such an incredible, fascinating, miraculous world, but it's through your comprehension, through your research, through your learning, through your analytical analysis. So now that you're grasping God through that, it's it's internalized because you used your intellect to get there. You worked hard on it, and it was your brain. The problem with that is that it's your brain, which means if you got there with your brain, you can leave with your brain. So if it's only based on your knowledge, as incredibly internalized as it is, if your brain were to take you somewhere else tomorrow and tell you that there is no God, or maybe you don't understand this thing about God, then you can leave it behind because it's your finite brain, your limited finite brain that got you there in the first place. So the plus of that is that it's real to you and it's internalized because it came through your process. The downside is that it came through your process and it's real to you. And if you change your mind for whatever reason, if your brain guides you elsewhere, you're toast. Faith, on the other hand, you could believe in the most super rational aspects of God, that God was, is, and will be. He was king, is king, and will be king. That God is the only ultimate true existence. When you have faith, you don't have to understand it, you believe it. It's beyond your logic. It's not because you comprehended it, it's because you believe it. The problem with that is that it's not internalized. It's from a distance. I believe. You know that song from Ron Ron? I believe. Right? I'm a son of Abraham. You don't know that song? You, the Lord and only you. I exist. Tell the world that I am well. I believe. I will live to tell the tale. I exist through the fire, through the hell. I believe I'm a son of Israel. You never heard this? Where did you grow up? The point is that having faith is very, very powerful, but because it's not internalized, because it's just faith, it's not knowledge, you could end up being a thief outside someone's house saying, of course I believe in God. Hello? Then why are you breaking into the guy's? What do you mean? I'm a thief. There's a disconnect when you have belief. It helps you incredibly when it's working properly, but because it's not internalized and it's not something you've worked on and really made part of who you are, then you're super capable of believing in God and doing whatever the hell you want, and it's not a contradiction to you whatsoever. So you need both because each one gives you something that the other doesn't. Knowledge of God, knowing God, makes it real in your heart. And it's through your finite experience and it makes it so real for you that it's amazing. But the problem is you'll lose it if you don't have emunah, because emunah keeps it going even when it doesn't make sense, right? So in a sense, faith in God is like a backup system. When knowledge isn't working, when you don't see God, you don't know God, you don't feel God, I don't feel it inside of me, and I'm going to lose it all, that's when we have a backup system, a generator, which is emunah, the belief in God. And really, if you look at the Rambam and the Raavad, that's what they're saying. The Rambam was all about logic, all about personal work. So what did he say? When did Abraham find God? When he was 40. Why? Because since, according to the Rambam, the most important aspect of a person's relationship with God is knowing God through your own work and through your own research and through your own intense internal labor to make it real. So he says, when did Abraham really come to a full recognition with his own intellect, right? To truly know God? That he was 40. Why? Because it says in Ethics of Our Fathers, Ben Arboy and Labina, you only get real intellect and maturity when you're 40. So naturally, Abraham was 40. Right? And actually, if you look at the Rambam's language, if you look closely to the words of the Rambam, he says that Abraham started snooping around and he started thinking during the day and the night, and he wanted to know how the galaxies were operating and how could it be that the galaxies would operate without an operator, without a director, and who's doing it. And the more he researched, eventually he came to the conclusion of monotheism, that there's one God. And according to the Rambam, that was when he was 40, because only at 40 could you come to that level of comprehension. And being that the Rambam believes strongly that the most important aspect of our connection to God is intellectual, because it makes it so internalized and real, that's what the Rambam focused on at the age of 40. But the Raavad, who argues with the Rambam, isn't really arguing. What he's saying is that the most important thing in your relationship with God is your faith in God, your belief in God. And that Abraham already, he didn't understand it, but he had it already when he was 3 years old. And so in our verse, when God is referring to Isaac and telling him that, oh, it's because of your father's incredible existence that you're going to be so blessed, it's referring to the incredible Abraham from the age of 3. Because when push comes to shove, what matters most is whether you were with God or not. And having emunah, having faith in God, means you were with God, even if you didn't fully comprehend it. And it's such an important, valuable lesson. Somebody in our community asked me about 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days after the October 7th, Shmini Atzeres slaughter of Jews in Israel. He said, Rabbi, do you mind I can ask you something a little personal? Are you not struggling with faith in God right now? And I said, Babullah, if I choose to go down that path, I wouldn't need October 7th to take me down that path. Meaning to find ways to question God doesn't make you a rocket scientist. Right? There's enough sorrow and pain and suffering in the world that to find reasons to want to walk away from God is easy. That's not a novelty. Right? In Yiddish, there's a term. In Yiddish, we say, to ruin things, even a kitten can do that. Right? You don't have to be a big, brilliant, sophisticated human in order to question things. The novelty of being a Jew is that even when it hurts, and even when it's painful, and even when it's challenging, and even when the world hates you, and even when your brothers and sisters are being slaughtered and raped and butchered, you still, and you're having an issue with your internalized recognition of God because you don't see him. When you stand at Old Faithful, you see him. When you stand at Sacagawea Peak or you stand at Highlight, you see him. But when you stand in Auschwitz in 1943, you don't see him. When you stand in Be'eri and Nir Oz and Kfar Aza in 2023, you don't see him. When you stand in Syria in 2003, you don't see him. In other words, when you go around the world and you see suffering, when you go to Pyongyang today in North Korea and you see suffering, you say to yourself, where's God? It's at those moments that you must have emunah. You must have faith in God, because if you didn't have faith in God, you'd walk away from God because knowledge isn't an option. And knowledge isn't always an option. And that's why the Torah gives us both aspects in order to have a healthy relationship with God and with Judaism, and what it means to be a Jew. You have to have Yedias Hashem, the research and the study of Hasidism and Hasidic philosophy and Kabbalah, so you have to the best of the human capacity to use your finite skills and your finite intellect and do your research and do your learning to find God. Sit on mountaintops and see God in nature. Look at the magic. Go to botanical gardens. Go to a butterfly sanctuary. Go look at the incredible gift that God gave nature, that gave us in nature. And look at medicine. And look at the body. Look at biology. Look at the way every body part works together. Who could create such a fascinating thing? You do that kind of study, and you have a connection with God. Not only have you know God, you'll fall in love with God, because the knowledge of God will create feelings. But when you don't see any of that, when the world seems dark, you need a backup plan. And that's emunah. The firm faith, the ani ma'amin, the firm faith that a Jew has, that even when things are horrific, we're still connected. We still recognize that God is our rock. So is it a cowardly thing to have emunah? No. It's only a cowardly thing to have emunah if you're standing in front of Old Faithful. Because in front of Old Faithful, you don't have to believe in God. You see him. So then you're just a coward. You're lazy. Because if you could know God and you choose to believe in him instead of seeing him and feeling him and knowing him, then you're just a lazy bum. But when you don't see him and you don't feel him and you don't know him for whatever reason, whether it's collective issues that are making challenges or individual issues, or you don't have the ability to do the pursuits that get you to know God, or he's just giving you a very hard time and your life is giving you a hard time, you're blaming him for it and you don't feel it at that moment, so then you have to have emunah. I still remember the summer of 2003. I spent the Shabbos in Solon, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland. And that Friday, if you remember in 2003, 20 years ago, there was a big, big blackout on the whole East Coast of the United States. The power, the dam, something in Buffalo where so much of the electricity on the East Coast went out. And from Buffalo to Cleveland to New York, it was like minutes before Shabbos that electricity went on in some communities. I was in Solon, we got it on right before Shabbos, and I'll never forget that Shabbos in Shul. Rabbi Greenberg, the rabbi there, said, the problem wasn't that the electricity went out. The problem was that the generator backup system wasn't working. Systems go out. You don't always see God in every moment. The question is, what is your backup plan? What is your rock that's going to keep you going when everything about your life feels like it's going in the wrong direction? That's emunah. If someone's standing and looking at Niagara Falls and they tell me that, oh, look at this, how can you not believe in God? No, that's not believing God, that's knowing God. And I know it sounds like I'm playing a game of semantics, but it's not. Belief is what you do when the thing is not in front of you. If you look at what's the most prominent prayer in Judaism? Shema. Very good. Most prominent prayer in Judaism is Shema. The Shema is the first section. V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. You'll love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. The second chapter of Shema is about reward and punishment. V'haya, if you will listen to everything that God tells you, right? You'll love God with all your heart, with all your soul. It doesn't say with all your might. But if you love God, I'll give you rain and good rain. But if you don't, right, then there won't be rain. What's going on over here? We say the Shema what? How many times a day? We say it at least once in the morning. We say it again at night in the evening service. We say it again at Krishna Shalamita before we go to sleep. And in these portions of Shema divided into three, the first portion says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. The second chapter says, with all your heart, with all your soul, what happened to your might? And this really boils down to the difference between knowing God and believing in God. Second chapter of Shema is talking about a world in which there's reward and punishment, which means in the world you're living in, God is operating as planned. If you are good and you love God with all your heart, with all your soul, you will be blessed with rain. And if you're not, be very careful that you shouldn't follow your heart, you'll serve other gods. And God will be upset at you, and there won't be rain. So if everything works as planned, and everything it says in the Torah is visualized, you can see it and feel it. I'm good, I follow Hashem's commandments, I pray, I love Him, I don't make any problems for God, and He gives me blessings. And I misbehave, and He makes it very non-blessed. Everything's working according to plan. So all you need to do is love God with all your heart and with all your soul. Meaning the relationship with God is very logical right now. You behave, you get blessed. You don't behave, you get punished. Call it a day. It's called reward and punishment. It makes perfect sense. What happens when a Jew wakes up and he realizes that I'm doing everything right and I don't feel God's blessing? Not only I don't feel it, I can't pay my mortgage. There's too much illness in my home. People are passing away. There's sadness and tragedy and sorrow and challenge. I can't keep a job. I can't keep my marriage. I can't deal with my kids. Everything's collapsing. The world is so dark. but I did everything right. Or vice versa. They look at the world and they see evil people prospering, which means they didn't follow God's word and the rain still came on them. They still got blessed. And now they have a lot of questions. So it's very hard for them to know God and to feel God and to internalize God because God is not following through on the way it was supposed to, the way it was promised. What do you do then? That's where all your might comes in, which means that's the backup system. All your might means you're bringing out a deep part of your core that isn't normally accessible and available. And you are showing up in your relationship with God, even though logically it makes no sense. You ever wondered how the Jews in Europe remain Jews? Where'd they get the strength to go into the gas chamber singing Ani Ma'amina? You know how many Jews went to their death singing that tune? Be'yemuna she'leima bevias HaMashiach. Think of the tune, by the way, not only the words, which is the belief in the Mashiach, but if you think of the tune, it's a tune that actually fits with the moment, right? They're going to their death. Bevias HaMashiach ani ma'amin bevias. And we always wondered when we read the stories, how did they do it? Where did they get the strength from? They didn't get it from Yedias Hashem. They didn't get it from knowing God. God was nowhere to be found. Quite the contrary. You saw everything but God. You saw what a world can look like without a God, with a society that was godless. And yet inside of them, they still had their emunah. They still had their faith. Because emunah is not dependent on reward and punishment. It's not dependent on logic. It's dependent on your core. It is your personal generator system that gives you the electricity you need to keep going in life, even when it doesn't click. I think of so many people in Israel today. How do they do it? Right? You see the images, you see fathers and sons who haven't seen each other in 6 weeks, 5 weeks, and they're meeting up in Gaza. And they both know that every day in Gaza is a chance that they won't make it out. And what are they doing? They're wearing tzitzis. And they're wrapping in tefillin. And they're watching on FaceTime as their babies are having brisses. Here in Bozeman, we had a bris yesterday. You saw the images coming out of DC yesterday. Incredible images. For a while, I thought they were only putting on tefillin with Jews that had arms covered in tattoos. Because there were so many Jews there who never would have been at a Jewish event. They were so distant from their Jewish community, covered in who knows what kind of body art and stuff, but they're rapping in tefillin. Do you know how many Hollywood stars and singers and experts in technology that are very popular people on social media that never walked around identifying as Jews? Now they're putting on tefillin and it's on social media. There's a young Lubavitcher guy, his name is Yossi Farrow. I don't know how he does it. He's young and he's very energetic and he's single and he flies around from California to New York all day and he's getting every big macher to put on film publicly. Where's that coming from? Today would be the perfect time if your relationship with God was based on knowledge, on your limited, finite way of seeing things. Today would be a perfect time to check out. If anyone asks you who you are, tell them, well, I'm a descendant of the Irish or the Scottish. And my name is O. Henry, O. Goldberg. The Jewish guy who's trying to sound like he's a non-Jew. O. Goldberg. Yeah.
Mick Goldberg.
Yeah. But the point is, the Jews are not doing that. Quite the contrary. Even though now, rationally and logically, the relationship with God seems so fractured, the emunah has kicked in. The bechol moedecha, that with all your might, has kicked in. And the Ravid's point from this week's parsha, that doesn't matter if you're 3 years old. You have emunah, that's what counts. And if you're a 52-year-old or a 28-year-old who has the level of Jewish knowledge like Abraham had at 3 or less, right? Your level of knowledge about Judaism is very low compared to your age. and yet you're committing yourself to being an identifiable Jew in 2023, that's emunah. And it's important to have both. So we must learn Chassidus. You cannot be a healthy Jew. You can't even be a healthy, righteous Gentile if you don't study Hasidic philosophy. It's what gives your soul sustenance to see the world with the proper lens, to interact with the world properly, and to use your brain and heart in a most refined, healthy way. But that's not enough. That's what's going to help you know God. You have to recharge, re-energize your emunah battery constantly, so that if push came to shove, and you were personally in a situation where you didn't see God, you would still hang on to God and recognize that life without God is not a thing for a Jew. It's not a thing for a righteous Gentile. And that is what the parsha is teaching us. You need Yediyah, you need Emunah, and they both need to be nourished. Now, nourishment comes in many forms. One of the nourishment forms is through having a connection to a Rebbe, because the Rebbe is a shepherd who helps you, guides you, and shepherd you to nourish that Emunah. But you need to have the Emunah and the Yediyah nourished, and it's a constant job, and then you will never have to worry. Even in the cancer ward, and even in Be'eri, and even in the foreclosure proceedings, you will still hang tight with Hashem, because it's coming from a place that's much deeper than your knowledge and your limitations and your finite experience. It's coming from a place of the infinite bond that exists within each, it's embedded in the soul and fabric of each and every descendant of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob, Leah, and Rachel. And that is our message tonight. You need both. And now, Zil Gmoir, get to work. You got the map, you know what you have to do. Now you got to do it. Go on Amazon. If you need help, let me know. Buy a couple of easily available, student-friendly books on Chassidus. And instead of reading the Times and the Journal, instead of wasting your time with your ESPN, I went to watch on Sunday. Many was invited by Irwin to come watch the Viking Saints game. So we got there for halftime. So I watched the half of the game while I was learning Rambam. And I was learning the Rambam, the laws of tumah, of impurity. And trust me, it's very hard laws and somewhat very boring. And I found it more interesting than the game. That tells you my feelings about the game, right? But my point is, for that, Baruch Hashem, millions and millions of Americans have time. We pay money to have 400 channels, so we have what to choose to watch. How about save your money, get rid of the channels, the news people will be fine without you, the sports people will be fine without you, and get some books on Chassidus and nourish your soul. It needs the nourishment. And if you need a shepherd to help you, call me. I'll be your shepherd. I can't say free of charge, because that would be a little bit of a lie, but we could definitely help you be your shepherd. But the point, you got to nourish the soul, you got to nourish the faith, you got to nourish the knowledge, and the rest will become easy, because you'll build up your immune system so that when your next spiritual COVID hits you, you won't get so sick, because you already built up the system to defend yourself against those type of viruses. That's our message tonight. Stay warm, stay safe, and we'll see you back here, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week. Remember, if you're in Bozeman, or if you're in Montana, or even if you're in who knows where, if you want to come on November 29th, 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have a special Farbrengen for Yutas Kislev. Rabbi Avrami Zippel of Salt Lake City, Utah, will be in Bozeman for a guest dinner for Farbrengen, as we do every year for Yutas Kislev. We'd love to see you there. Sei gesund, be proud, be strong, be soulful, be bright, and have a wonderful evening. Sei gesund.
Are you getting sushi for Yutas Kislev?
Who just said that? Noah? Who just said that?
Yeah, it's Noah.
Only if you bring some with you. No, we're going to have Javi's going to cook for you this Kislev. You want to know the next sushi party when it's worth coming out? I'll let you know.
Is that Hanukkah?
No, Hanukkah, like as latkes. You want to ruin the whole Yiddish guy? Generally, Tzukis and Shvuas, but you never know. If in between, we're having Shalom Lemmer in March. We might have a VIP event with sushi. By the way, I don't even know why you need to come here for sushi. You live in the East Coast, you know what I mean?
Right.
Anyhow. Sei gesund. Good to see you guys. We'll see you later. Margot, Chagai, Laila Tov.
לילה טוב.